Good morning, everybody. Stan, I think we're going to get ready to get started. Good morning. Thank you, everybody, for attending the Connecticut Racial Profiling Prohibition Project, Truth and Reconciliation, a conversation about race and policing forum. This forum came together in fairly short order, and we are really grateful for all of the partners that have agreed to participate and sponsor the forum with us. And so I would just like to very quickly, before I turn it over for introductory comments to our chair of our Racial Profiling Advisory Board, like to very quickly acknowledge and thank the sponsors for this event, which include the Institute for Municipal and Regional Policy at Central Connecticut State University, the Anti-Defamation League of Connecticut, the Connecticut Police Chiefs Association, the Division of Criminal Justice, the Department of Emergency Services and Public Protection, the Commission on Human Rights and Opportunities, the Commission on Women, Children, Seniors, Equity and Opportunity, the Connecticut Convergence Institute at the University of Connecticut, the Connecticut Data Collaborative, the Police Officers Standards and Training Council, and the Office of the Public Defender. So a big thank you to all of our sponsors, and especially just a special thank you to the Anti-Defamation League of Connecticut for hosting us on their national Zoom account and allowing us the platform to have this conversation. So with that, Chairman Dyson, I'm going to kick it over to you to kick us off, and thank everyone for attending.
Hey, thank you, Ken, for that opening, and I want to say thanks to all the people who have consented to be on this forum. And I also want to confess that it's been a long time seeing all you guys, and I'm just so pleased to see you today. A lot of things have happened since the time we last saw each other and today, and that's part and parcel of the discussion that we're going to have. In light of the experience that we've had, question obviously become, what do we do next? And how do we get there? And I like to think that this forum is a beginning. It's a start on having that dialogue to ascertain where we're going, what is it we need to do, and then and how do we get there. And so my comments are brief, and I don't intend to have very much to say until later on. And I just want to encourage all of us here to participate in the discussion. So thank you very much, and it's a pleasure seeing all of you.
First of all, thank you, Bill, and thank you all for joining us. Looking forward to a very engaging conversation, truth and reconciliation, a candid conversation about race and policing. Before we get started, the whole genesis of truth and reconciliation, as most of you probably know, dates back to 1996 in South Africa. After apartheid, Nelson Mandela had served 27 years in prison fighting apartheid. He ends up being president of the country. The bloodless revolution, as part of his legacy, the idea was, how can the country heal from the atrocities of the past? What's the best strategy to do that? So they formed the Truth and Reconciliation Committee. And the idea was, we've got to know the truth, the historical truth of the agony and the atrocities that happened during apartheid, acknowledge it. And then once you had the truth, then you could move forward and reconcile. So it's a very appropriate title for this forum. As you know, we're here in large part because of the recent death of George Floyd, the Minnesota black man who died at the knee of a police officer, a white police officer. It's spanned protests across the world. All 50 states have had protests, and across the country, across the world. So that's why we're here. And we have a very erudite panel, eloquent and erudite. We have 9 members on the panel, folks. 9 members and a bunch of you who are tuned in here. So we want to try to get an engaging conversation with 9 panelists, and a lot of police chiefs are tuned in, and police leaders want to hear from you as well. So I want to introduce the 9 panelists, and then we'll get flowing. First, we have Neil Drive. He's the chief of police at Cheshire. He represents the representative of the Connecticut Police Chiefs Association. We have Dr. Cato Lawrenson, who is a well-renowned orthopedic surgeon from UConn. And he is he's also the chief executive officer at the Convergence Institute, and is also a member of the Connecticut Racial Profiling Committee. We have Chief Anthony Campbell, former police chief from New Haven, is now the assistant chief of the Yale Police Department. We have Tamara Lanier, the Connecticut NAACP, and also the advisory board member of the Connecticut Racial Profiling Committee. Richard Colangio, the chief state's attorney. He was sworn in just recently, January of 2020, so we're interested in hearing his fresh thoughts. We have Doug Glanville. Doug Glanville is a public member of the Police Officers Standards and Training Council. Most of you probably know him as a former Major League Baseball player, a veteran baseball player, played for the Cubs and the Phillies, also an ESPN sports anchor or announcer, so you know him, I'm sure, from there. We have Tanya Hughes, who is the executive director for the Commission of Human Rights and Opportunity. We have Brian Foley, executive assistant with the Connecticut Public Safety Commissioner. And we have Steve Hernandez, executive director for the Commission on Women, Children, Seniors, Equity, and Opportunity. And I hope I didn't miss any of the 9 panelists. I think we got them all in. So welcome to you all, and welcome to the folks who are tuned in. So first question, and Ben, let me apologize to him, but I'm gonna give my apology now, because at the end of this forum, all 9 panelists are gonna be mad at me, because I mentioned before, they're very eloquent people, very erudite, and they're gonna say, Simpson didn't give me a chance to expand on my thoughts. I won't be able to do that, but I have to be the bad guy. If it gets too long in the conversation, I gotta keep things moving. So I'm gonna apologize in advance if I have to keep things moving and engage all 9 members in the audience. So first question, the title here is Truth and Reconciliation. Chief Campbell, for you, what is the truth, the whole truth about race and policing from your vantage point?
Well, first and foremost, Stan, I want to say thank you, and I'm thankful that I got the first question. And given that it's about truth and reconciliation, ironically, the motto of Yale University is Lux et Veritas. And part of that deals with truth and light. And I believe the truth with regard to race and policing is that, as the death of George Floyd exemplifies, we have a long way to go. Policing has not really dealt with the disparities that exist in this country when it comes to race. Whether that is the number of African-American people who are involved in policing, or the number of unarmed African-Americans who are killed by police officers. These are realities that we have not dealt with properly. And I think the death of George Floyd is crying out to law enforcement to deal with the truth, that there must be a form of reconciliation. I do not think that it is any accident that the daughter of George Floyd, who is 6 years old, said that daddy changed the world. She's right, because his death is bringing forth the truth that in law enforcement, we do not deal with race. We do not deal with the reality that policing does not deal with race and how we police communities of color and how we are over-policing communities of color. And I don't think that it's any coincidence that, as a person of faith, I look at the reality that over 2,000 years ago, it was a man of color who died on a cross and cried out to his Father, and he changed the world. And today, 2,020 years later, we have a Black man who died at the hands of the authorities, who cried out to his mother after he said he cannot breathe. We have a long way to go, and we must deal with race head on in policing if we're ever to stop the types of appalling atrocities that happened to George Floyd, Eric Garner, Michael Brown, and others at the hands of law enforcement. We can do this. Panels, there are intelligent people here that can do this, but we got to deal with the truth that we need to reconcile.
Those are the words from a Black police chief. Let me hear the thoughts of a white police chief, Neil Drive, over in Cheshire. What's the truth about race and policing?
Well, I can't say it any better than my friend and colleague, Chief Campbell. I also believe that we have a long way to go. But these things are complex society-wide issues, and we need to keep the conversation going. We need to keep working together. That's really the only way that we're going to resolve this. This can't be something that people decide is going to be pushed on us by legislators. It has to be something that police departments, police chiefs, police administrators, and members of the community, most importantly, members of the community get involved in policing, get involved in your local government, get involved with your police departments, and push us and hold us accountable. That is how we are going to move this forward. I think that we've made great strides in the state of Connecticut. I shared with, I had an opportunity to do a radio interview earlier this week on Hot 93.7 with another old friend of mine, DJ Buck. And one of the things that I said to him was, you know, I've been a police officer in Connecticut for 30 years. And just looking at the people in the, you know, the law enforcement folks represented here, there's probably about 150 years of policing experience there. You know what? I can't find a single person in the state of Connecticut, police officer, who's been ever trained to use a neck restraint or a carotid hold or whatever other kind of fancy words that people use to try to justify that kind of a restraint. Never in 30 years. That means that for decades now, the people who are in positions of leadership in law enforcement in Connecticut have said, you know, that's not something we want to do to people that we come into contact with on the streets, that people that we have to take into custody. That is not going to be an accepted use of force. One of the other things that I learned a couple of years ago after the shooting in Ferguson, Missouri, you know, never once in the 30 years that I've been a police officer here has any administrator or city leader ever come to me and said, you know, if you guys want new police cars this year, you're going to have to go out there and write a whole bunch of tickets. But apparently in other parts of the country, fining and police work is used as a means to generate revenue. Again, for decades and decades, the political leadership and the administration of police departments and city and local and statewide government in Connecticut has said, you know what, we're not going to use our police departments as a way to raise revenue. So I think as law enforcement in Connecticut, we're ahead of the curve. Now, again, we have a lot of work to do. There are conditions in this state as well as across the country that cry out for intervention. And I think that as police officers, we can play a role in that. But again, only if we work together with the community. So from my perspective, Stan, that's the truth where we're at. I'm not completely without hope. I think as long as people of faith and of goodwill are willing to work together, there's always a way to move this conversation forward.
So we have a black chief and a white chief in concurrence on what is the truth, that police departments have fallen short and needs to do better. Tamara Lanier, Connecticut NAACP, you've heard from the guys on the truth. I think they concur. How do we begin to reconcile? What are the steps to reconcile? Steve Hernandez, you can jump in after that too, but Tamara, how do we begin now to heal?
Before I get to the healing, I want to talk a little bit more about truth telling and what that means for me. And if we're going to look at this dynamic, we have to start with the history and the origin of it. And that's starting with the history of the penal system or slavery, and how slavery evolved into what we call convict leasing, the peonage system. Then we see we see the chain gangs. We see moving forward Jim Crow. Then we see the civil rights movement and the unrest related to police brutality. Then we see mass incarceration, racial profiling, to where we are today. So to understand where we are, we really have to go back and look at the history and have a real honest debate, a real truth-telling session about how the penal system has evolved from slavery to where it is today, and understand how that has impacted Black lives. So we have to have that education, that honest conversation, so that we can understand the differences as to how I look at policing versus how someone who's never had that exposure or experience looks at policing. So that's tough. That's important. And then you asked me about the healing. Was that it?
Yes, healing. How do you reconcile? What steps do you take now to heal?
Okay, in healing, we start back again with the education, because again, in order to empathize, or sympathize or have an understanding about how I view policing, you have to know the history. You have to know where my perspective comes from. And that is a historical perspective based on my own experiences. And so one of the things that concerns me is I think we generally lack the ability to walk a mile in someone else's shoes and to understand how people have formed their perceptions, particularly of the police or the criminal justice system, and their distrust. And so we see often people will comment after a deadly police encounter, which shows they have absolutely, firstly, no empathy for the person who is dead, and secondly, no understanding of the history and the reasons why people have a fear of police. So there's an education that needs to happen and an honest discussion about where we are and how we got there.
Okay. Steve Hernandez, and then I want to hear from Doug Glanville too, but Steve Hernandez, jump in. Dr. Lawrence, I haven't forgotten you guys. Also, Mr. Colangelo, haven't forgotten you, but we're going to keep things going. Steve, following up on that.
Thank you, Stan. I really appreciate Tamara's reminding us that there is a chain of history here that we need to address. You know, and for the reconciliation part, in order for there to be meaningful truth-telling and meaningful consideration, every actor, every agent needs to be at the table. Everyone who is complicit in either not confronting or dismantling the historical reasons that we are where we are has to be at the table. What does that mean? That means ensuring that that kids aren't growing up in poverty. That means ensuring that our children are reading by 3rd grade. That means ensuring that our families have meaningful opportunity to earn a living wage. That means ensuring that we break intergenerational cycles of poverty. Because unless we are willing as leaders to invest in our people, all we are doing is pitting our people against each other. And truth and reconciliation, every time that we say it is too expensive to help people break out of poverty, all we're doing is perpetuating the very system that was born out of slavery in this country.
All right, I want to change gears. Doug Glanville, I want to bring you in for a second. You're very involved with the community, a public member of the Police Officer Standards and Training Council. I think interesting to me, you're a former Major League Baseball player. You played under various managers. And I think there's an old adage that where there's a good team, there's a good leader. Where there's a bad team, there's a bad leader. To what degree, talk to me about leadership and police departments, and that if there are rogue cops in a department, it reflects poor leadership. Talk about the role of leadership in this whole issue of race and policing.
Well, thank you, Stan, and I appreciate everybody getting together. This is an important conversation and certainly a big first step. I think for starters, when you talk about team, I've been on the Post Council for a few years. I have to say it's the most productive and effective organization I've been a part of. The efficiency, the communication, and one thing I'd absolutely say is you look across the country at each state, I would recommend that they make sure that civilians are part of this process in establishing standards and training. That is something that's not necessarily nationwide, but it is in Connecticut, and we are a great example of that. So I wanted to start off by some of the stuff we've worked on with use of force, pursuit, all these policies we've worked on together. And civilians like myself have been at the table and were listened to, and it's a very diverse body. So you talk about team, you talk about representation, you're talking about bringing everybody from all different perspectives, listening, and then expanding that to the larger public so that they are feeling represented. And so the challenges are obviously beyond law enforcement in and of itself. There's so many other elements that Mr. Hernandez outlined very well about the overlays and the ways that things are stacked upon each other. But I've been on teams that were successful in part because they were able to recognize there's an individuality to it and people have to execute their roles, but they also elevate and maintain that the team is the most important part of it. And you look at where we're at now in the pandemic and you say, okay, should baseball come back? And if it comes back, is it essential? Well, it's not essential, it's non-essential, but what it does is it reminds us of team. And we get back to how the United States of America is our team in this context. So it's important we keep that forward and making sure we're not what I call color by numbers. You bring in people in the room but have no voice, and then you don't actually accomplish anything. You have to get some of these root questions. So, one point example, the officer who kneeled on Mr. Floyd had a whole host of complaints on him, for example. It's something like 18 complaints. Now, I take that number and I imagine it's probably more than that, because you think of the challenge and intimidation of someone complaining who might have to take 2 buses to get to the precinct. Look, I had my experience, and I was able to walk in because I had access and exposure to law enforcement in a very positive sense. Volunteer coaches. My father was a psychiatrist who worked with law enforcement, so I was empathetic, and they ended up the officers came to my father's funeral and escorted the funeral procession. So, when you have exposure and intimacy and you're not in a segregated world, then you'll start to focus on the team. So this is going to be important. All of us are team members in our community. And I do think there's some great examples right here in Connecticut.
Great. I want to go to the chat line. Again, Mr. Colangelo, Dr. Lawrenson, have not forgotten you. I want to go to our chat line. I want to encourage you all who are tuned in. Appreciate you being here. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat line. As I see them, I will get to them. We want to try to accommodate all the folks who have questions. Question, what do the chiefs plan to do to regain the trust of the community, to be able to have the community become a partner in their efforts to change the perception that police are the enemy? And let's do this. Let's bring in Mr. Colangelo. You're a chief state's attorney working on the other side of things here. What are your outside thoughts on how do police chiefs regain trust? What would be your advice as a prosecutor?
Honestly, it is about that, and thanks for having me. It's about that communication and transparency, honestly. One of the things that I know that all of the state's attorneys are trying to do, and you indicate, I'm new to this position. I got sworn in on the 31st, and then a pandemic happened, and I wasn't able to reach out and meet the groups that I wanted to reach out to yet. So I'm still planning to do that as a chief state's attorney. But when I was state's attorney in Stamford, Norwalk, I had a community engagement board where each chief nominated a couple of individuals from the community that were part of that board. So it gave me an opportunity to give members of the community insight into what we do in the criminal justice system. I know that most of the state's attorneys either have one or are planning on getting or forming one of those. So I think that's a place to start. One of the first things my engagement board wanted to do was meet with my police department and my chiefs, to get that interaction and get that kind of trust going. And it really is about building trust now. To Ms. Lanier's point, right? It's, this history has happened. So how do we build the trust in the system, and the police are part of that system, to move forward?
Dr. Lawrence, I want to bring you in a bit about trust and how where there's lack of trust, a lot of times there can be mental health issues. When the community doesn't trust the police, it can engender stress issues, and vice versa for an officer who doesn't trust the community he's in. Can you talk about the medical sort of anguish that's involved when you don't have harmony with police and the community they're covering?
Well, first of all, thank you. I want to thank you for having me here. And just to preface my remarks, let me just say that I do believe we still have a long way to go here in Connecticut. It's really been an honor to work and to serve with the other members of law enforcement around this table, who I admire a lot. I do think, though, in Connecticut, we still have a good deal of work to do. Is it better? Yes, probably. I am harking back to the fact that I was chairman of orthopedic surgery outside the state, and I came here and moved here to Connecticut. And before I moved here, someone said to me, you're going to Connecticut, you are going down north. And I know that, members of the Black community have heard that phrase before, that you are going down north.
Explain that.
Meaning that you're going to a place that has, where racism and discrimination is still there, just like you're in the Deep South. Now, interestingly, I was chairman of orthopedic surgery at the University of Virginia when they told me that. To put it in context in terms of their thinking that I was going to a very discriminatory environment. So just to put that in context, yes, I think that there's been some progress, but there's still a ways to go. As you know, in my last address to this group, I stated that we should start to really poll individuals and gain their perception about how we are doing in policing in the state. Not only those individuals who are just in the community, but after someone is stopped, they should be actively polled with Press Ganey or other methods to find out. I think that's how you actually find out how you're really doing in terms of the community. As you know, I've also spoken out about the medical effects that take place.
Yes.
If you look at, and we talk about the dramatic, of course, the killing of Floyd, but let's just talk about what's going to happen as a consequence. We know that when a Black person who's unarmed is killed by police, and people know about it, that has effects on Black lives. We know that on average, 55 million extra negative mental health days will take place in Blacks around the country versus, and to put that in context, Blacks with diabetes are rated to have about 80 million mental health days that are negative because of their diabetes. Just this one event will have repercussions across the country for Black individuals. So we shouldn't just think about this as this one person dying. This is going to cause pain, suffering, but medical suffering and death among Blacks across America. And it's known that these effects will be depression, suicidal ideation. These effects will, some individuals may not be able to work, maybe even work again after viewing what happened with Mr. Floyd. And so these are deep wounds and deep instances. We know that in terms of even those who have repeated traffic stops by police end up experiencing PTSD type symptoms. We know that those individuals who have any altercation with police, even if it's one time, end up exhibiting and having PTSD type symptoms that are taking place. And so the trauma that takes place is not only the trauma that's taking place in terms of Mr. Floyd, but there's a huge aftermath of trauma that's taking place across the country that will have repercussions probably for a generation to 2 generations in terms of Black people in America.
All right, let's go to our chat line. Back to reconciliation. Can you please offer some advice on how we can work with our local PD? We have reached out to our local suburban PD to make them aware of peaceful demonstrations in support of Black Lives Matter. The police chief said his officers were taken aback, that we were taking a stand. We made it clear that it was not against the officers, et cetera, et cetera. So basically, how do you get police to understand that Black Lives Matter is not an anti-police movement or an anti-white movement? Let me get Chief Campbell on this, and then followed by Chief Drive.
Well, one of the ways I think you do that is been echoed by many people in that the community and the police have to work together. Modern day police father, Sir Robert Peel, said it this way: the police are members of the community whose full-time job is to ensure the safety of the community through offering friendship and relationship. And that's what I believe police chiefs need to do. When I was the chief of police in New Haven and Black Lives Matter was coming, I met with them. I found out what their agenda was. I found out what their goal and what their message was. And once you do that, once you form that relationship, then you don't have to be afraid. You don't have to be taken aback and feel like you and your officers, because then you as the leader can convey to your officers what the protest is about, why people are hurt, why people are upset. And I think that that has been one of the failures for police leadership across this country, is that police leaders do not take the lead and make connections with these groups and find out what the grievances are. It's okay to go out and stand with the protesters, because as we all saw, and I think Chief Keith Mello said it best in his statement for the Connecticut Police Chiefs Association: if what you saw is not appalling to you as a police officer, then you need to take off your badge and give it back. So it's about communication, understanding who the protesters are, what they're protesting. Most of the time we can stand with them, and I think we must in order to move forward.
I want to get Tanya Hughes in on this as well. I realize I haven't gotten Tanya. And Tanya, there, I want to get you in on the term Black Lives Matter. Tanya Hughes, the Executive Director of the Commission on Human Rights and Opportunities. So she sees a lot of these complaints. Can you just give your own perspective? With the term Black Lives Matter is offensive to some. Some it's empowering. What is your viewpoint from the complaints you see? What is your perspective on this?
Good morning, and thanks for the opportunity to take part in this candid and powerful discussion about truth and reconciliation. As you know, CHRO has a special relationship with enforcement, and we're responsible for investigating complaints of discrimination. With respect to Black Lives Matter, as an African-American woman, I'm horrified by the atrocities that we've seen, by the videos that have been, that keep erupting. Ahmaud, George, Brianna, Trayvon, Sandra, Philandro, the list goes on and on and on, and I'm just simply exhausted. To be able to view that video of George's death being taken from him in plain view with a look on the officer's face, not only of accomplishment, but of impunity, that was horrifying to me, knowing that he believed that he was exempt from punishment or serious consequences because he had never been held accountable for those offenses. I'm horrified that viewing these types of events have become commonplace, everyday activity, and that people have become so desensitized and immune to them that we focus more on how people are expressing their frustration and anger as opposed to why. Why are they expressing their anger and frustration? And that's in response to the vile and disgusting abuses that have created the need to protest again and again and again. So as a member of this committee, I'm hopeful that as we move forward, we can use the data that we've been able to gain to hold the few bad apples accountable, so that we don't wind up with an orchard of criminals with a badge. We need to be able to act swiftly and unequivocally when confronted with evidence of abuse and discrimination. We must be vigilant about how we use this data to properly vet officers before they are hired. We must closely monitor and discipline those who exhibit abusive conduct and remove them from duty, as well as prosecute them when warranted. We must continue to push for reform, and we must make it uncomfortable for the abusive officers to continue their behaviors. We can no longer ignore or remain silent. Silence is not an option. Inaction is not an option. CHRO remains ready to do our part. We encourage anyone who's been a victim to file complaints. I personally have been engaged in a number of discussions on social media, one in particular that resonates with me, regarding an image of a father at a protest rally who had his child placed on his shoulder. And you saw a group of officers, and there was one officer in particular who had raised his weapon and pointed it in the face of the father. And one of the comments online was, why would the father bring their child to a protest? And my response to that person was, that's an interesting takeout. Your perspective resonates because it tells of your experience. Obviously, you haven't had a child who's had to deal with the N-word at the age of 4 or 5 or 6. You haven't had to prepare your child for the talk of how to handle yourself if confronted with racism and discrimination. So clearly you wouldn't understand the need to demonstrate to your child about speaking up and speaking out in a peaceful protest. The father wasn't wrong for bringing the child to the protest. The police officers were wrong for making it an unsafe environment for that child to show his daughter that he wanted to stand up and speak out about these gross atrocities that are occurring in our country. And so when you say, what is the truth is accountability. We can no longer allow this to continue.
All right, I want to, Tanya, thank you. I want to go back to Chief Dright, and I haven't forgotten you, Doug and Steve and Tamara. I haven't forgotten you coming up next with you. Chief, I want to go back to the chat room question on what else can communities do to work with the PD. And I think the question is really talking about suburban communities that may have suburban officers who are resentful of the Black Lives Matter movement. And so how do you talk to your officers and get them to understand that it's not necessarily an anti-police movement, but affirming that Black Lives Matter? Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, I think it just comes down to communication, open, honest communication. And I think one of the things that maybe we didn't hit on before is that's not just about, police chiefs and police administrators talking to members of the community, but that is a message that we have to send internally as well. We have to be in the room with our police officers, talking to them about all of these issues that are going around, the country and internationally. We have to let them know that this is completely and totally unacceptable. And by the way, that's not a message that we had to send about this incident. I've talked to police chiefs, I've talked to police officers over the course of the past 10 days, and I agree with exactly what Tony talked about, that Chief Mello had said in a statement. Not one person has said to me, I was taught that, that kneel on somebody's back restraint for 8 minutes, that, I don't know what could have happened there. Nobody says that. Everybody's disgusted by it. Everybody thinks it's wrong. Everybody wonders, what are they doing? Nobody understands. No trained police officer looks at that situation and see, okay, I get what they're doing there. Nobody gets it. And again, we are dealing right now as a largely, again, I spent the first 21 years of my career in Hartford, but I've been the chief in a suburban, largely white community for the past 9 years. There is a lot of community-driven interest in protests and vigils in support of various causes, including Black Lives Matter in this community. And we've worked with the organizers, trying to do our best to support whatever it is that people want to do. And again, that's just a message that, I don't know that you can write out something on a piece of paper that says, this is an appropriate reference for the, for this type of group. But again, I think that comes from the top, from us as police leaders.
Right. Brian Foley, I realize that I've left you out here. I didn't mean, I apologize. So I have excluded you inadvertently. Your thoughts on this? You were a former deputy chief in Hartford, you're executive assistant for the Commissioner on Public Safety. And a guy who's very engaged in the community. When you're in Hartford, you were a guy who was very known for his engagement in African-American communities, Latino communities. You were a guy who people understood, got it. What would you advise folks and how to get involved with their police departments, become part of the solution?
Well, it's more on the police department end, Stan, and thanks for asking me. The one thing I've been saying since this happened is when stuff like this happens, when negative things happen, you're going to find out what your community thinks of you when you're a police department. And you want to start having these relationships built years in advance prior to this and go out and talk to the people. And so when something sensitive does happen, the community already have faith and trust in their police department. And let's say something bad happens 1,000 miles away, as this murder did happen up in Minnesota, 1,000 miles away, and it affects all of us. We're all getting a report card on what the community thinks of us. And it's going to be negative no matter what, but the departments that are doing really good. And if you look at Bloomfield and Cheshire last night, both had just amazing vigils. But some of the inner cities are struggling a little bit more, but Connecticut's been really a leader. You saw what happened with the state police on the highway stand and taking a knee. Look, at taking a knee is, it's not necessarily you're turning in your badge and gun and your uniform. It's expressing that you think what happens up in Minnesota sucks and it's wrong. And so some officers are having some difficulties with that. But as to what the community members can do, listen, get involved and care. Commissioner Avella had a meeting with some community members yesterday. These are community members that have been involved in trying to stop violence in their own communities. These are some people from Bridgeport, Hartford, and New Haven. And these are people that want to get the work done. And he did some things that were pretty amazing. He canceled a program, and I'll get into that publicly at some point later this week, likely. But getting involved with the police department ahead of time is more likely when something bad happens as well. The police department's going to hear them because they know you, they trust you. Trust is a two-way street. But Connecticut is in good shape. But certainly we have a lot of work to do, and we're going to keep doing it. We're not going to change everything in one meeting, one community meeting, but we can all start to keep pushing the needle in the right direction and recognizing that we do have issues.
Tamara Lanier, Doug Glanville, Steve Hernandez. I want to talk about the police and the police union, and maybe it's not an ideal question for you all, but there's the police and the police union. And I was struck by the fact that in Minnesota, the police union is still fighting for the rights of the officers who were fired. They are still sort of injecting the notion that there are other situations there where they need to be protected and given due process, which is important. But it seems like the police unions are sometimes reticent to speak out against cops who are rogue. Can you, from your own perspectives, talk about that? Is that a disconnect where you have your police officer, the police chief, and the union that feel it needs to protect everyone regardless of what behavior they have? Tamara, I'll start with you, then Doug, and Steve.
And speaking from my own personal experience, I'm the vice president of the New London NAACP branch, and I work very closely with our president, Jean Jordan. And we had a very interesting conversation about the nature of all the types of complaints we receive, but there is no complaint more challenging, more frustrating, and more exhausting than dealing with a complaint of police misconduct, because you feel like you're fighting not only the police department, the police officer, but the police unions. And one of the things that in that discussion we shared is that they don't fight fair, because what happens when the NAACP takes on these kinds of complaints, what we've seen in the past, and again, I'm speaking from prior experience, there's attacks against the NAACP on social media. There's like this campaign that is waged against the organization. We're called cop haters. And what happens is the union, and sometimes we're successful where officers are fired. The municipalities let the officers go. And then what we learn later is through arbitration, they've gotten their jobs back. And so the union is probably the greatest force that we encounter when we're dealing with these kinds of complaints. They have a lot of resources. There seems to be no limits to what they say or do. And it's certainly with the concern is that clearly bad behavior, it's indefensible behavior that they defend anyway. So that has been our greatest challenge. We receive all kinds of complaints, but there's none more difficult than dealing with a complaint of an officer misconduct, because you feel like, you know, you're fighting and you're getting incoming from all directions. But the important thing to look at here is, and I hope at some point we get to that discussion, so I won't go into it too much, but decertification, and I'm glad there's a gentleman here from Post so that we can talk about that. When we do fight this fight and we get a bad officer removed, there's no guarantees that he will never put on a badge again. There's no guarantees that he will never get his job back. So we go through all of that and only to have a labor board restore this officer. And one of the things that we're hoping that comes out of this incident in Minneapolis is that there is stronger decertification laws that take the certification away from a bad officer so that a labor board or another town can in turn go and hire them. But
I'm going to cut in there. Doug Glanville and Steve Hernandez, you piggyback on that, please. The unions, you roll the unions and the police officer and protecting bad cops on principle.
So, I think that we talk often in our meetings about certification. In fact, that's, central to how we sort of get started on the new officers. And there's a lot of connecting points that we have to shore up because, as you mentioned, the Labor Review Board, in terms of having priority and how someone gets reinstated. Sometimes it falls down on the municipality if there's inconsistencies with how they decided to remove somebody and the authority that they have. So, although with post having that certification power is significant and decertification power, there's also another layers to be able to keep it upstanding. So and absolutely it's necessary to continue figuring out how to improve those standards 100%. And as you know, Chief Mello works in both capacities, the chair of the Police Officer Standards and Training Council. I'd also like to add that from the standpoint of unions or players association, that was my role when I played Major League Baseball for all those years. And so I almost have this as a question, but the sort of blue line we talk about, how do we see that evolving and what's the possibilities? Because, I do understand that these officers deserve due process. Absolutely. That's the American system. But then you want to make sure that there's a continuity and consistency, that the protections are not to the level where you're overlooking and ignoring patterns and practices that are extremely harmful, especially as we're talking about race. So I understand. I remember being part of the union, and obviously less smaller scale, but this idea that you're looking out for your constituents and you're working in a certain way, and there can sort of evolve a little bit of an us versus them approach. And so I guess I throw that out there to the union in general, just about that, the culture and what you think could be possible in shifting that just enough to sort of bring that community in.
I want to bring Steve Hernandez in. Steve, let's talk about for a second policy. Let's talk now about where change starts. You deal with a lot of equity issues. So if you had a voice with the governor or whomever and said, where do I start? What would you advise in regards to training, policy, deadly force? Where do we start? Now's a great opportunity to get some changes done. What's the first policy you'd want to see changed?
Well, first of all, I think we need to intimately understand that justice is not the opposite of due process, first and foremost. There is room and there's space for both to coexist, but there has to be justice as the underlying value. Due process is the way in which we preserve that justice. So that's first and foremostly, I think we need to simmer in that notion. Secondly, I think we need to also understand the consequences of the quiet but disquieting reality that Connecticut is a very segregated state. We are segregated by race and class. And oftentimes, policing doesn't happen in a vacuum. And oftentimes what's happening is that you are seeing the results of values that are either not being communicated or are just the inheritors of a system of values that are older than all of us. If you don't dismantle inertia, then you live under its weight. And in the state of Connecticut, we still have the results of redlining. We still have the results of racial and economic segregation. And so many of us are the beneficiaries of those systems. We need to confront that. So if I were to give any advice, I would say, don't just address the symptoms. Addressing the symptoms is critical so that you don't lose vital tissue, but you have to address the core reasons that these things happen. And I'll tell you what, I look at education policy that funds inequitably. I look at inequitable access to opportunity. That's where my advice would start.
All right, I want to go to Mr. Colangelo. In your role as Chief State's Attorney, prosecutor, Connecticut, story taken to Hartford Current. Connecticut over the past 5 years, I think there was 21 killings or deaths of citizens by the police. Of those 21, 16 have been cleared, and many of those were years-long investigations. 5 remain undone. There's been a feeling that when police are investigated, it takes an inordinately long time to do so, and then when it's all said and done, it's dismissed. In your role as a prosecutor, what are your thoughts on the investigation of police misconduct, police killings, and why does it take so long to get some kind of resolution to these complaints?
Whenever there's a use of deadly force by the police officers, the Division of Criminal Justice leads those investigations into that use of force. They're done by a recent statutory change a couple of years ago, 3-4 years ago actually, they're done by a state's attorney that is not in the jurisdiction where that officer works. So there is, you know, a separate state's attorney kind of coming in and looking at or investigating that case. One of the things that takes so long, to be honest with you, is getting the investigation done and completed. You know, I've handled, you know, many of these. I've done in the 5 years I was state's attorney, I did 4 of them. So in looking at them, they are, you know, extremely complex. You want to make sure that you're leaving no stone unturned. The state police does the crime scene for us. We bring in the state police to do the investigating for us. So by the time we get the reports from the state police, we go through them. You know, it takes a long time to get that information. So one of the changes that we made last year in the division is to require state's attorneys to complete the reports within 120 days of getting the completed file from the state police, from the investigator, whoever's doing that. When a state police are involved in a deadly use of force, the Division of Criminal Justice actually is the ones that take over that investigation. So we're investigating one right now. So that's one of the kind of misconceptions in the public, that these things, you know, we're just sitting on them, we're not doing anything. You know, it does take a lot of time to get the information. There was a couple instances where, yeah, those reports didn't get done. And that is on us as a division. And, you know, we're making sure that doesn't happen again.
All right, I'll go to my chiefs. Foley, Campbell, Drive. What tangible change would you suggest in regards to training? You guys know this stuff, you know, the nuts and bolts of this. What would you suggest we do now in regards to training and policy? What's the one thing you think needs to be changed right now? Start with Brian Foley, please.
I don't think there's one panacea that we can say one thing, but certainly I think at an early level in the police academies, getting police officers that don't have exposure to so many other environments. I look at myself coming into the police academy 25 years ago with absolutely no experience in the city of Hartford, getting the recruits out into the academy, out into the communities around the state, and at the same time making that the academies open up to the communities and bringing them into the police academy. So, you know, a police officer in whatever corner of the state is going to have exposure to people in your urban communities as well. Look at, not every police officer is going to, you know, look at the state police. We're not going to necessarily have a lot of work to do on the streets of the city of Hartford, but the city of Hartford so many times comes up onto the highway and intersects with police departments on the highway in suburban towns. So getting them the exposure, that's what's been most important to something I've tried to bring change to both the Post and the Connecticut State Police Academy. Bringing those recruits out in the community for your national night outs, for community conversations, and then at the same time, bringing in the ADL, the ACLU, bringing in, we could, Raya SAP and Street Safe down in Bridgeport. We're bringing them into the academy to talk to kids, the NAACP, just to say, hey, this is what we expect of you as a police recruit. This is who we are. We're not against you, and this is what we're trying to do. Getting the recruits that exposure.
Chief Campbell, what change do you make training? Because a lot of times, let me add one thing too, that a lot of times when you have to bring police officers to justice, they're able to say, well, listen, it may have been a bad incident, but this is how I was trained. And when you tell a jury that hey, this is this person died, and the officer says, this is how I was trained to respond, it's very difficult for a jury. They're very compassionate toward police officers. And an officer tells them, I was in fear of my life, and here's how I was trained to do that. It's hard to really punish. So Chief, what kind of things can we do with training that seems to compel officers to make a lot of bad decisions, i.e. putting a knee on someone's neck?
I think that a big portion of increasing the training and policies that will help prevent many of these atrocities that we've seen lately is having policies that create direct accountability for officers who are present when another officer is violating the civil rights of a citizen or using excessive force. If any one of the other 3 officers who were there, as that white officer kneeled on George Floyd's neck, had tapped him out, had said, brother, he's saying he can't breathe, get off of him, there would have been a change. And I think that needs to start at training and on a policy level where we have a direct policy across the board in this state, and I believe across this country, that says that any officer who is present and watches another officer violating someone's civil rights or using excessive force, they have to take immediate action. I think we need to practice that in the academy. That needs to be the motto of police chiefs from posts all the way down, that we have to change these policies and make sure that officers take action and are required to report it, whether they were there or find out about it later, because they are just as accountable. The accountability shouldn't just be from the community towards the police. The police, we have to police ourselves and be more accountable. And I think that starts on the level of training and policy development.
Chief Drive?
Yeah, I don't want to throw cold water on that question, Stan, but I think this isn't policy. Look, these officers in Minnesota were fired within 24 hours because they violated the policies of the Minneapolis Police Department. They've all four now been arrested because they violated the criminal statutes in the state of Minnesota. I read a column. I'm not going to do it justice because I can't remember exactly where it was, that talked about the Minneapolis Police Department and how they have procedural justice training and cultural diversity and competency training. And unlike, I see some questions popping up in the chat about body cameras. This is one of those situations where all four officers were equipped with body cameras, and apparently they're all working. You know, I don't know that there's any piece of legislation or any policy. As Chief Campbell said, we already have those policies in the state of Connecticut. We have use of force policies here that absolutely, definitively, proactively put an affirmative responsibility on police officers to intervene in cases of excessive force.
All right, but let me challenge you on that. I want to bring in also Richard Colangelo. You mentioned, your body cameras. The problem is that when body cameras capture these horrific situations, Tamir Rice, a young man, I think it was Tamir Rice, who was just shot dead in a park. Eric Gardner. When you see it with the body cameras, there still isn't it seems to be a slowness in process to take action. The camera shows you something, you see it, and there's still this protracted process to take action and to punish. Let me bring in Richard Colangelo and Chief Drive. I'll have you respond to that. But from your standpoint, Mr. Colangelo, Chief State's Attorney, how do you deal with that when you have camera evidence, and what bogs down the process when you still see what appears to be just wrong? And I give an example, being an example of the young man, I think it was Tamir Rice, who was just shot dead in the park because the cop thought he saw a 12-year-old with a plastic gun, just killed him.
Let's use Mr. Floyd and what happened to him, because that's a little easier. And I'll talk about Mr. Rice in a second. Sorry, but
sure.
In Mr. Floyd's instance, right? Everybody can understand and look at that and say, hey, that's a crime. Right? There's no question about that. The officer had no reason to continue to do what he did for the length of time that he did it. So that's a crime. You kind of handle that quickly. The instance you're talking about, Mr. Rice, I mean, that the shootings or the excessive use of force cases in Connecticut that are captured on body camera, we have to go through them to look at the officer's training to see, was it a proper exercise of force, use of force, based on the department policy, based on their training and what they did. So those are the things that go into those questions and situations. And another thing that, one of the questions, that popped up, there's a perception out there that when we look at these cases that a state's attorney has a side in these things. And, that is the furthest thing from the truth. And whenever I speak to the victims' families in these cases, that's just that. We're looking at the facts, we're looking at the information that we gather, applying to the law, and make a decision based on those two things. We don't have a side. It's not like we're for the police against the victim, for the victim against the police. That's not how we could do our jobs as prosecutors. Nor is that how I want to see my prosecutors doing their jobs in Connecticut.
Go back to Chief Drive. We'll go to Chief Foley, and I want to go to the chat room. So Chief, kind of building on that, on other training procedures and policies and changes that can prevent a situation where an officer says, hey, this is how I was trained. I know it looks bad, but that's how they train me.
So I guess in Hartford, we had a firearms review panel that we would have to have something to them in 5 days. And that was a panel of community members. And what was important was that we train them in police procedures and getting people to know what the police procedures are. But at the same time, there's some new trainings in the police academy for police officers that look at that are going to teach them when there is certain force being used that isn't the best force to be used, that is excessive force. We actually have it in the Connecticut State Police Academy there's just no way to show it's working. And that training is that they have to recognize when an officer is using excessive force and then take action to move them away from it. You know, again, your question about firearms, that's the firearms policy and the firearms training, I believe, can be modernized. And they're trying to do that in a lot of the police academies as to when not to shoot. And the firearms training should be when can you shoot, but it also can be when not to shoot. My problem was, as being trained as a cop, as a youngster, that you were always trained that this is a justified shooting. This is a justified shooting. And well, maybe we should, to some degree, train officers that justified doesn't always mean the right thing to do. We've all seen shootings in the state of Connecticut recently that are justified shootings. Justified doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. And we've all seen shootings in the state of Connecticut cops that I would not, without picking on any individually, and although I certainly have, Stan, when we were co-workers, I went out on a limb and said my opinions on plenty of police shootings. There needs to be some sort of way to train officers when to shoot, when not to shoot, and can't just be based on justified. Because as a cop, when you're holding that gun and when you're pointing it at someone and you feel your life's in danger, is your head thinking, is this justified or not? Or is your head thinking, I'm going to die if I don't pull that trigger? You can't be thinking, is this justified or not? Because sometimes things are going to be justified and you might pull that trigger because it is justified. It's a tough position for police leaders. I just want to touch on one other thing.
Sure.
The woman said earlier, police unions, every police chief on this panel has tried to get rid of problem employees. I guarantee they've tried to get rid of problem employees and have not been overly successful at it. And there's one reason for that, and that's the police unions. And the problem is the people in the community, they point the blame at the police chief. It's the police chief's fault. It's the police administrator's fault. Yeah, well, look, we're all going to accept some blame in this process. Everyone in this panel, from Chief Campbell and Chief Drive, and I'm sorry if I'm forgetting anybody else, has tried to get rid of problem employees, and they've been stymied around every single corner because of the police unions. And that's who we need to have on these panels. That's who we need to have in these difficult discussions, is to get their point of view. I'm sorry, I just needed to get that off my chest.
No, I appreciate it. And I want to throw another question that leads into a nice issue. There are two tangible examples when it comes to the mentality of police departments. You have Camden, New Jersey, where basically, if you guys know the story about this, in 2012, it was one of the most violent cities and poorest cities in America. They basically disbanded the police department and hired new police. Everyone was laid off. They hired new police. They went with a concept where they were no longer considered, warriors and sort of this, protect. They were there to be community servants. So they got involved with the community. They weren't encouraged to get involved, and they were encouraged to de-escalate. And so long story short, they enacted community policing with bicycles and foot patrols and getting involved in the neighborhoods, getting involved with the communities, and crime dropped 21%. Investment came back into the city, jobs increased. The city was transformed over a 5-year period because the mindset of the department changed, that we're not here to just crack heads. We want to be part of the solution. We want to be servants. We want to work with the community. In Japan, they have a de-escalation strategy. Japan, they don't have a shoot first mentality. They do everything they can not to shoot. They are very much focused on de-escalation. It's only as a very last resort. I know that's said here for America, but in Japan, they are trained that the gun is something they're not really trained to use. They're trained to how to de-escalate conflict without the gun, and you don't see a lot of shootings in Japan. So why can't more police chiefs do that? Chief Campbell, see you shaking your head. Tanya Hughes, get your thoughts. Chief Campbell, why can't we change the mentalities of police departments where, you're not necessarily a paramilitary organization, but a department there to kind of uplift and serve the community, warts and all.
I think that Chief Foley said it best. It is a changing of the mindset. It is literally getting people to repent. And that word means go in a different direction. They went in a different direction in Camden by adopting community policing, which is integrating with the community, serving their needs, having a guardian mindset. And I think that that is something that across the board, 17,000 different police organizations in this country, many of them are still stuck in the 1950s, 1960s mindset that you call 911, we come and determine if a law has been broken. If so, we make an arrest, and if we need to, we will use force. Police departments across the board, not just police chiefs, have to have the mindset that the arrests and the use of force and the use of deadly force has to be the absolute last resort. And that is not the mindset of most police departments. If you watched the news this morning, you saw Buffalo PD push a 75-year-old man down to the ground who was using no force, and they continued walking as he lay there bleeding on the ground. It has to be a shift in the mindset that we are not here to be warriors. We are guardians of the community. We stand with the community. And until that mindset takes hold, until everyone on this panel, and thank you, Chief Foley, for bringing up, until the unions take hold of that mindset and get it down to every officer that if you can't be part of this mindset, turn that badge in and go somewhere else. This is not the job for you. That's what we need to do.
Tanya Hughes and Steve Hanna, same question. Change the mindset, not warriors, but community stewards, uplifting the community. Is this part of the problem?
Absolutely, and I could not concur more with Chief Campbell. The culture of the department trickles down from the top. The officers are really just exhibiting the behavior that is portrayed by the chief officer in command. So if people are turning a blind eye to inappropriate behavior, the behavior will continue. I say again, make it uncomfortable for those officers to continue that behavior. Yes, it is very difficult to rid yourself of a problematic employee, but you can make it very uncomfortable for that employee to continue their behavior by monitoring them extremely closely and making them have to answer and holding them accountable for their actions. Accountability, accountability, accountability. I cannot stress that enough. Make them the outliers.
Steve Hernandez.
I think what we're seeing at its foundation is that tension between training warriors and expecting a person who's going to come out of that training with relational skills. You can't switch out one for the other. You have to invest in the academies. I'm imagining all of these young men and women who are being trained to be warriors, to be strong, to be fast, to react. But they're not learning the necessary skills that we say our kids need every day, which is the relational skills, empathy, connection, coming up against any human being and treating them like the human being that they are. That is critical in this equation.
Doug Glanville, your thoughts, and Dr. Lawrence, you can weigh in here too, as the idea of the mindset, going to the more of the Hamden, New Jersey, Japan mindset, where you're there to serve, not to punish. Your thoughts on that kind of philosophy? Doug, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, Stan, that's a beautiful model. And I know we've talked about programs like Blue Courage, right? To figure out getting a little bit more into a guardian mode that has a community uplift component to it. It also gives officers a chance to sort of reinvest and be reinvigorated in a long career. You might want that injection of a sort of new model. But, I think that, along the lines of race, we have to look at this also. I mean, I just did a panel with the former Major League Baseball players, and we talked about this idea that, you talked about justified versus right, but where that benefit of the doubt when it comes to race, as a black man or a black person, it sort of seems to skew to the criminalization of that equation. And so it's the feeling of fitting the description all the time. And the fitting the description is not just what's on the police blotter or, black man in his 40s or whatever. It's also in the mind of our society. If you're racialized in a criminality format, then you're always sort of losing the battle of that benefit of that split second where you have to say, is this right? Is this justifiable? Race tends to push the equation against people of color, right? And because you have so little time and you lean on biases at times. So it's a very challenging equation to solve. And so I recognize that, as we try to unpack that, trying to come up with different models, we also have to understand what's overlaid in that. I think of all these experiences I've had since I've retired, and I went to Los Angeles Airport trying to get a cab, and the guy tells me to take the bus. And it's like small, but it's big. And so if you overlay those experiences, and you talk about the sensitivity and the fear factor of these types of engagements, then you add sort of the law enforcement component. We have a lot of work to do to just restore, because restorative justice has to be part of this. Going back, I remember there used to be a program, I don't know if we still have it, where you would go back and sort of touch all the people that were engaged in some altercation or some arrest, and sort of find almost like a customer service and find out, okay, what was this experience like meeting? And I know it takes manpower, women power, but it's important to get that feel of, so that you restore something like an apology. That something as simple as that can make a huge difference, and acknowledging mistakes and acknowledging that. So all that goes into that model you talk about, Stan. And I think there's definitely ways we need to look into it further.
Dr. Lawrence, I want to change gears with you. I have a question from the chat room that speaks to anti-bias training, cultural competency, making sure these officers are aware of their surroundings, the people around them, and have training where they're able to get more comfortable with the people they're patrolling. Your thoughts on the need for cultural competency for officers of all stripes?
Yeah, let me just comment on that. But first, just a couple of quick comments. One is that first of all, I'm happy to be here. The term of this meeting is Truth and Reconciliation. I don't know whether we, as speaking as someone that actually was there at the opening of the Truth and Reconciliation Conference in South Africa, I'm very proud to have done that. I don't know if we're near there yet, because let's face it, we have a like-minded group here in general around this table. And in order to have truth and reconciliation truly in this country, we have to have a country committed toward racial justice. And we're just not there yet. This country is not there yet. First. The second is I am positive about the fact that the concept of Black Lives Matter has had a change over the last 2 to 3 months. I received a message from Uber that started with Black Lives Matter. I received an email from the CEO of Johnson & Johnson under the rubric of Black Lives Matter. So we're seeing a difference in terms of people understanding the concept of Black Lives Matter. Now, in terms of policing, I looked at the Black Lives Matter website. It's an interesting organization in that there's not a giant leadership group. There's not a giant national organization group, and so can there be a police Black Lives Matter chapter across the country? What can be done proactively? When we talk about proactive, not only training but in terms of life for police, what can be done? Or if the term Black Lives Matter is not a term to be used. Police against racism, PAR or on par, creating a national movement and organization among police for racial justice. I think that should be considered. The second is that I've talked about this concept of trauma-informed policing. If you know that Black people in this country are traumatized, how does that reflect on what happens when you stop a person? These events that take place where people are being killed are dramatic, but they're everyday events that are exceedingly dramatic that are taking place with Black people and brown people every single day with the police. And trauma-informed policing, understanding the PTSD symptoms, understanding the trauma that takes place from racism that's taking place every day with Black people. How does that reflect in terms of policing? I actually asked for the state of Connecticut's curriculum at the academy for training of police at the academy, and received a copy of it. at least when I received it, there was no information on trauma-informed policing, no information on, and that may have changed, but no information, at least in the copy I received, on looking at racial justice and the concept of racial justice and how that comes into policing. So I think we do have a ways to go in terms of that area, but there are things that we can do, especially with the people around the table and law enforcement around the table. There are things that we can do to proactively move forward. And I think we can't maintain the status quo of just being good police officers. We have to move toward changing the system and making the system better for Black and brown people.
Right. Tamara Lanier and Mr. Colangelo, I want to question. Here's the truth. And the title here is Truth and Reconciliation. Here's the truth. In Connecticut, Blacks and Latinos make up about 28% of the population. In the prisons, they make up 75% of the population. I'll say that again. In the prisons in Connecticut, 75% of the population comprised of Blacks and Latinos. In the state, less than 30% comprised of Black. And what is the truth of that statistic? What kind of truth can we garner from there, Tamara Lanier?
Well, speaking from a person who's spent a lot of time in the correctional facilities, I would say that number is even greater. But the truth is, the Connecticut Department of Corrections is the repository for the Connecticut Judicial Branch. In that what we see in our state correctional facilities is the outcome or the result of implicit bias in sentencing. With those numbers, we should see, with that number of people incarcerated, Black and brown, there is either one of two conclusions that you can draw: that there is inherent bias in the sentencing process, or that Black and brown people are probably perhaps the worst criminals in the state of Connecticut. And we know the latter is not the truth. Specifically, we know that research will show that Black and brown people don't commit any more crimes than their white counterparts. So when we look at the disproportionate number of people incarcerated in the Department of Corrections, that is a reflection of a biased judicial branch. And
I'm sorry, Tamara. Let me go. We have a few minutes left. But I think I got your point, Mr. Colangelo. You're the newly minted Chief State Attorney. You're the prosecutor. 75% of the population, Black, Latino, of the prison population. 30% in the state. What truth does that tell you?
It tells us we've got a lot of work to do, right? I mean, and one of the things that I was excited about in getting the position of Chief State Attorney was the new prosecutorial transparency bill. To be able to be required to now gather this data to get some understanding on what is actually happening. And to that end, I mean, I developed a new position for the Division of Criminal Justice, a manager of research and planning, to be able to delve into the data so we could figure out actually what's going on. I mean, I want to make sure that somebody that commits a crime in one part of the state doesn't get treated differently in another part of the state just because they came from a different part of the state. So, understanding the data, getting a sense of it is the first thing that we have to do. And then we could kind of delve deeper into and kind of get to those answers and come to the ways to fix it and address it.
Steve Hernandez, real quick on this. What does that tell you, those statistics, disparities in the prisons?
Well, I'll tell you, when the young man who is alleged to have committed the crime, the young man from Newtown, was on the lam, there was a letter that was released asking him to come home, promising him justice, telling him that his parents missed him.
Yeah.
That's the way we should be treating every child in the state of Connecticut.
Okay, I want to go, we have about a few minutes left. I see some chat room chatter there, but Doug Lamb, I want to talk to you about white privilege and how some other way, white privilege and how it's become sort of culturalized. We've heard of the situation with Amy Cooper in Central Park Karen. She has her dog on leash. There's a Black man there who's bird watching. He asked her to leash her animal and she's offended and says, and gets so offended, she says, well, I'll fix you. What I'll do is call the police and tell my Black man is threatening me, and that will fix you. And she does that. The fact that she can do that, Doug Glanville, what does that say about our society that this white woman can tell this Harvard graduate, unbeknownst to her, that if you keep bothering me, I'm just going to tell the police the black man's bothering me, and they're going to fix your business. Doug Landau.
No, it's a great question. I mean, it just clarifies that concept of privilege. It clarifies it. She feels that law enforcement is there to serve her, that will protect her. And she's also criminalizing race to know that this will ratchet up the response. And I think it's our job, especially when you're talking about law enforcement, to push back on that. I mean, people call 911, and first of all, the idea that something you could be doing mundane could actually lead to death. And I always call it the comma effect. You know, you have, when you're a man of color, a person of color, you say something good, but there's a comma, but there's bad. Oh, well, you know, he got killed, but he was doing, it's all the qualifiers. But the privilege allows that to spin towards something positive. Well, you know, he shot up this movie theater, but he was the captain of the chess team or whatever. So, you know, we have that, that's where privilege shifts it. And I think it's a challenge because I know law enforcement has to respond to every call. But sometimes I'm wondering, you know, is there a way to push back on these callers? Like, what's happening? There was a scenario where my wife was considering, had to make a call, and because someone was at the door and all this, and she literally had to weigh, because I would have fit the description, she had to weigh safety versus if I call the police, they may come and see someone who fits the description as my husband is coming home from work.
And Doug, you might be saying, Doug, your wife is a white woman. So that needs to be, that context is important. As a white woman, she understood that.
No, not a white woman. She's of color, but it's just that she, the suspect looked like me.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Right? Okay.
And so her calling the police, she knew that I would be coming home when they possibly would have been investigating this, and she didn't know what I was walking into. And that's it. So the feeling, the privilege side allows you to not feel this threat of connecting, getting called on for something relatively mundane, Airbnb, shoveling your drive, whatever it is, and then it possibly escalating to something fatal. And so,
we have 2 minutes left.
I do think it's about challenging sometimes, and I don't know how that can be done, but the caller, exactly. I know you want to respond, but what's this about? The guy's walking down the street, he's jogging in the neighborhood, he looks suspicious. Is that really enough of a burden?
Be more discerning. Brian Foley, Neil Drive, we have about 2 minutes left. Quick on this. Does the term white privilege offend you? Does it offend your white officers? And what are your thoughts on white privilege? You have about 30 seconds, a minute. We got to close things out. We'll start with Foley.
Is what perception is. And Doug, you know, boy, he actually had an issue like that happen to him here. And police departments need to train their dispatchers and their officers when responding to bullshit calls BS calls like that.
We're on Zoom. It's okay.
To do a better job of it. And thank God when it happened to Doug, it wasn't our police department, but I can't imagine what him and his family went through. Dispatchers and PD's got to do a better job of weeding out that nonsense.
Neil Drive, real quick.
Yeah, look, I concur. It's a very difficult thing to place on a civilian dispatcher to be now your line of first defense. Because what happens to the police administration when that dispatcher makes the wrong call and it actually was the woman's ex-boyfriend breaking into the house, and now there's a major issue.
All right, we're gonna close things out. I'm not sure you guys answered my question about white privilege, but we got 2 minutes left. Mr. Dyson, I know you're gonna close this out. Thank you all, the panel. You're a phenomenal panel. Thank you for the questions. The chat room was buzzing. I couldn't get to all of them because they're so engaging with the conversation. But Tanya Hughes, Brian Foley, Steve Hernandez, Doug Glanville, Richard Colangelo, Tamara Lanier, Anthony Campbell, Cato Lawrenson, Bill Dyson, you can close this out. We appreciate it.
Hey, thank you very much. I'm so happy with the level of the discussion that we've had today. It just reinforces the notion that if we engage in more of this, we would have a better understanding of each other, and it would build the trust that people talked about on this panel today. I'm pleased at the level of the discussion that has taken place, and I'm just looking forward to us being able to have more of these discussions in the future. So let me just say thanks for being here. Thanks for being a part of this. And there's a next step. We've got to go and do something. So we have to figure out what is that something that we need to be doing and how do we make a difference. So you think about that and we'll get together and figure out something. But in the meantime, thank you very much for your being here today.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, folks.